picture on the front is the setup I have in my vehicle, in my truck. It's a Ford F-150, but this works equally well in a car. So I'm going to kind of go through all the different scenarios. So we're going to kind of talk about some basics, mobile antennas, radios, probably the biggest thing, bonding, choking, and noise control. I'm going to take you through the 3 stages that I use to build my mobile setup. And we're going to look at one setup that is a particularly good installation in a car. Interestingly enough, the one in the car with a 100-watt radio worked the Philippines on 20 meters from the car in the first week. How many of you have Philippines from your home station on 20 meters? There you go. And we're going to talk about operating and DXing and also some of the fun you can have with mobile HF, which is really the best part of this. All right. So anytime you deal with shortened antennas, which inherently you're going to have to do in a mobile, you're going to have to worry about efficiency a lot because you're going to be using load coils and other things to make up for the fact that your antenna is short. And the way you want to think about this is there are 3 parts. There is the part of your antenna that radiates, that's the radiation resistance, okay? There's losses in coils, so when you do mobile HF, you're going to have a load coil, like this one, probably smaller. But this is going to exist in some form of your antenna. And what it's made of, the thickness of the wire, and how it's made will have a big impact on the losses in your antenna system. And then you're going to have ground losses, which is the fact that you are going to be missing half the antenna and using the coupling between your vehicle and the road to make up for that missing half of an antenna. And what you want to do as best you can is make the radiation resistance big and those other resistances small. And how much of those things are in play are going to be a function of your frequency bands. So here's a little table. I know it's hard to read, but on 15 and 20 meters, you're going to have a long enough antenna that you're maybe going to be 50% or more efficient, which means if you have a 100-watt radio, you're going to basically radiate 50 watts or so on the air. If you're crazy like me and you do 160 meters from your mobile, now you're in a very different world where you're less than 1% efficient. And so particularly if you want to operate on the lower bands 40 and 80, which is probably as low as you're going to go for most of you, you're going to want to think about ways to make that radiation resistance and core resistance and also the ground loss relatively high for the radiation resistance and low for the other numbers. Safety is the number one concern. Some of these things can be big. This, for example, is a ham stick, or I believe 20 meters. 15, okay, brought the 50-meter ham stick. And while this is not a particularly heavy antenna, if it's not securely fastened to your vehicle and it comes off at 60 miles an hour on the on 89, it's going to hurt somebody. So whenever you do this kind of stuff, pay close attention to make sure your antenna mounting systems are stable. Okay? I'll leave this up here. By the way, you're all welcome to come up here and play with the toys after the fact here a little bit, if you want to look at some of this stuff. Height is better, as Mitch said, but think about trees and overhead clearance. Obviously, with something like this on your roof, it's going to get fairly tall, okay? Here's a hint for you. There's more clearance when you're driving on the driver's side than on the passenger side. The way the road, people trim the trees and all the stuff that these antennas get hung up in, if you just look at that, you're going to see the center of the road is your best chance not to get this thing caught up in tree branches. And putting it on the passenger side kind of optimizes its ability to catch every single thing along the road. So think about that when you install your antenna. And metal under the antenna is good. If you can get this in the center of your vehicle and towards particularly left and right and front and back, that metal ground plane underneath it is going to tend to optimize the performance. But it's not fatal if you have to put it on the edges. And bandwidth and matching also become a big deal. An antenna like this will tune for a very narrow range of frequencies. The more of that load coil stuff you use, the narrower it will get. So you want to think about when you set your antenna up about the operating frequency range, at least with ham sticks. and plan accordingly. Now, there are some free tricks like cap hats. So here I have an antenna. This is the radiating part. This is the capacitance hat. Anybody have a guess on what frequency this is resonant on? In other words, what frequency could I use this without a load coil? Anybody want to guess? 15 meters. This won't work on 10. It's actually too long. So this is the only free lunch that I know of in mobile HF antennas. So what's going on here? Well, this is providing this thing that looks like a helicopter blade. Is providing top loading. And what that does is instead of my maximum current being in my load coil like it is on that antenna, it's actually right here at the base of the antenna. So the radiating part has maximum current, and this replaces the missing, well, let's see, on 15 meters, 7.5 meters, that'd be 21 feet. So this is probably replacing the missing 16 feet of a full-length quarter-wave radiator. And this antenna on 15 is actually many times more efficient than my ham stick. Because what's going on here is the high current part is in the loading part in the bottom of the coil. So that by the time I get up here, I'm already in the short part of my antenna. There's no current up here. Whereas when I use this antenna, my current is maximum at the base and is still very high up here. And the zero current point is out here where I'm not trying to radiate. What's the problem with doing this? You need a stronger antenna, usually a screwdriver, and you need a good secure mounting base to use it. But this is how you work places like Japan and China and other things from your mobile if you can build it. Okay. Step-ups, most people start with ham sticks. They progress to a screwdriver antenna like you see on the right, which will be a better antenna. Radios. Most people run 100 watts. An effective noise blanker is the #1 most important feature in your mobile HF radio. You want something that's going to be able to take that tick, tick, tick from your coil on plug and your alternator and your computer electronics and suppress it. That is the #1 type of noise that you're going to encounter in a mobile HF setup. DSP noise reduction is also important. If I were to rank quality of noise blankers, it goes ICOM, Kenwood, Yaesu. So ICOM radios tend to have a distinct advantage in mobile setups, not because they're necessarily better receivers, but because they have better noise blankers. Okay. Display readability is really important. Much more important than if you're using a VHF, UHF radio for repeaters, because in that case, you have pre-programmed memories. Maybe you put your radio on scan, and you can drive and not look at the radio and operate it just fine. But in a mobile HF, you're actually going to be tuning the radio if you're going to operate when you're driving, and that can be very dangerous to do and distracting. So how do you deal with that? You have two options. The best one is to do what you see here, which is to mount that control head right up on the instrument cluster, next to the speedometer and the stuff that you can look at it and keep your eyes on the road. If you do that and you're careful, it can be safe to operate when you're moving. If you don't do that, if it's down in the cup holder on the side, you should never turn it on unless you're stationary, because it is not going to be safe. Okay? Most radios that are made for this have removable control heads. That's an ICOM 7000, which in my estimation is the best radio ever built for mobile HF. Got a great display. It's easy to remove the control head and mount it in that area. It's unfortunately no longer in production, but there are a million used ones out there. So if you're looking for a radio to do this, you don't have one yet, that's a choice I can recommend. Also, the Yaesu 891, which is a newer radio, is also a nice small setup that can be mounted on your dash. As long as you get that control head up where you can see it without taking your eyes off the road or your hands off the wheel, it's reasonable to operate on mobile. Accessories, you need an external speaker. As much as you'd like to wear headphones when you're driving, it's not safe to do that. Fortunately, a lot of modern vehicles have a stereo audio input for like an iPhone or an iPad or something like that, or an iPod. If you have one of these, just plug the radio output right into your sound system in your vehicle. That works great. I've done that in my truck, and it's very easy to hear. If you don't, get yourself a good speaker and mount it in a place where you can hear it. Voice recorder. This is really important. You're going to make DX contacts if you build a good mobile station, and you're going to want to log them. And it's not going to be safe to do that when you're driving. So you're going to want to get yourself one of these. This is a little voice recorder. They're not expensive. And the way I operate with mine is I put this in my cup holder. I make sure when I work a DX station, I say the other station's call. So I have it. I say the signal reports, so it gets recorded. And when the QSO's over, I glance down and look at the time, and I say that. When I get stopped or when I get home, I'll take my paper log, and you thought paper logs were dead. Well, here's a use case to have one. And I log the contacts in my paper log before I forget about them. Okay, convert them usually to Zulu at the same time. And then when I get home, I'll put it in my computer logbook. That's kind of how I do it. If you're sitting somewhere in a parking lot, have a paper log as you go. It'll save you one step. But don't try to do this or write on a pad on your steering wheel. You'll see all this kind of stuff on the internet while you're driving. It's too distracting to do that safely. You will be a hazard on the road. So use the voice recorder if you're moving, and then the paper log if you're stationary. And you'll be able to get your contacts recorded and be safe. Some radios don't have great microphones. There are people out there, I have them in the links, that will upgrade, for example, the ICOM 7000 or a Yaesu microphone to sound better. That's worthwhile to do. And if you do progress to a screwdriver antenna, you might want to get a controller that can remember, based on the frequency of the radio, how to adjust the screwdriver antenna so you get right on frequency. What I find is that's nice to have, but not necessary. If you tune your radio to a certain frequency and you just have a screwdriver antenna that you can manually turn up and down, you can hear by the level of the noise when the antennas become resonant and get it very, very close. And then what I'll do is when I do my first transmission, I have an SWR meter in my vehicle. I'll touch it up, and that works fine too. So you don't need a controller. And they sort of work, but they don't work reliably, so half the time I end up touching them up anyway. So don't get real hung up on the screwdriver antenna controller. Nice accessory, good thing to have, but definitely not necessary. And you're going to want to have something to monitor your voltage. This is easy to do. You get one of these little cigarette lighter plug-in gizmos, particularly if you get into the realm of running an amplifier. You're going to want to watch your overall voltage. A lot of folks don't take the time to quiet their vehicles down, and they only operate fixed with the motor off. And particularly if you're going to do that, having that voltage monitor is going to be important to keep an eye on your battery levels. Okay. This is the thing that matters. It matters almost as much, maybe more so than the antenna. When I put my setup in my F-150 with this screwdriver antenna, when I turned the radio on, I had S9 plus 15 dB noise with the motor running, which means that unless somebody's sitting pretty much parked next to you, you're not going to hear much. By the time I was done with what I'm going to show you on this page, I was S3 with a second preamp on. And I could actually hear better if I went to a quiet location I can hear from my home station. So how do you get from point A to point B? It's all about bonding and grounding. There's lots of stuff on your vehicle, like your exhaust pipe, that picks up the RF energy from your transmission, runs it through a whole bunch of corroded joints, which work like diodes, generates harmonics all the way up and down the amateur radio bands. And that's where that noise comes from. So what you have to do is you have to break up those chains by grounding them and bonding them together. And then you also need to make the metal on your vehicle look like one continuous sheet of metal, because that's what your antenna is partially working on to couple to the road as like a big capacitor. Think of your body surfaces as one plate of a capacitor. The other plate is the road underneath you. And that's how your antenna couples to the missing half of the dipole that you need to the ground. So the more that that's a continuous sheet of metal and large, the better your antenna is going to couple and the lower your ground losses get. All right? So let's go through this. Number one thing bond the exhaust pipe. You can see that's what I'm doing here. Take something for each section of your tailpipe and bond it to the metal body or the frame of your vehicle. That breaks up that thing that picks up with the diodes and the corrosion and re-radiates. That probably got me from S9 plus 15 to about S8 alone. You can easily get kits to do that. The next thing that matters is your engine block. The radiating source of most of the noise in your vehicle is coming off of things on your engine. And that little DC ground that goes from one side of the motor block to the frame through the mounts is not near good enough to bypass that noise. So what it does is you have a very strong radiating source when your motor's running. Get yourself some good bonding material. This stuff is great. I think it's still available. It's a heavy metal strap with grommets every few inches, so it's really easy to bolt and install the things. You just use a sheet metal screw, a star washer, and some no-locks, or probably Pentrox is better because it's more conducting. One side goes to your engine, the other side goes to the body of your car. You do it on both motor mounts. S8 to S4 for my vehicle with that one trick. So those are going to be your two big hitters. Ground your motor block properly to the frame. Ground every section of your exhaust to the frame or the body. And you'll find that your vehicle will quiet down considerably. Beyond that, you want to take the hood on the straps like you see in the upper right and bond them to the body of the body. You can do the same thing with your doors, your trunk lids. Those things will all help the efficiency of the antenna and further quiet things. But the step of the motor block and the exhaust pipe is the thing that's going to quiet it down for you. Okay? Another thing you have to worry about is RF getting in the vehicle and playing hell with all the electronics that are in your modern vehicle. Now, with this type of ham stick, you're probably not going to have those problems. But if you use a screwdriver antenna where you have a motorized coil, the RF potential of that motorized coil is above ground. And so the leads that you use for your screwdriver controller to adjust the motor, the length, the coil up and down, are a RF hot path. So you have to choke them out. And what you're going to do is you're going to get yourself some cheap wire and some toroids, and you're going to build these. You're going to build yourself bypass chokes for your motor and control leads on your screwdriver antenna. It's very important that these things, if you have 4 leads and you build 2 of these, that you not stagger them, because what will happen is the RF will get off of one, get on the wires and bypass the choke and get up the other pair of leads. Now I run 500 watts of power in my mobile, so I have this problem big time. And I basically built 2 sets of these. I built one right at the antenna, and then I built a second one right where this comes inside the cabin, a second set of these inside the cabin of the vehicle, and at 500 watts, and all the electronics, the navigators, and everything else you can imagine. I have 0 problems with it. So I'll pass this around. This is easy to make. And no, that's your answer to keep an RF out of your vehicle. Okay. And again, don't stagger the chokes. So that's the story on grounding, and choking. Now, let's get into actually doing this. So this was my first mobile HF station. And that's kind of wonky. What's going on there? So this was it was a 100-watt radio, Nikon 7000, ham sticks just like this for 10, 15, and 20 meters. Those will be your most effective bands. Ham sticks use so much loading on 40 and 80, they're really not very effective. I wouldn't recommend it. So a couple things when you first do this. Note the super heavy-duty 3-magnet gizmo on the roof. The biggest problem I had was actually taking that off of there once I didn't want to use it anymore. Okay, it is really a sturdy mount. And, you know, I can't stress enough how important it is if you're going to do this kind of stuff to have solid mounts. Especially if you're going to use magnets, get something that's up to the task of being up there and hit by a tree branch at 60 miles an hour. It's okay to break the top of the ham stick off. It's not okay to dump the whole mount in front of somebody's windshield at 60 miles an hour. Okay, you got to be really careful with that. You can see I took the trouble to mount my radio up here on the dash. As you do with all mobile radios, connect directly to the battery with independent fusing, so you have adequate current. Don't use the cigarette lighter output at 100 watts. You won't have a good experience. And one of the things I did right is we mounted the radio on the kick panel on the passenger side with the rear of the radio facing back. Why? Because when I wanted to run contests or special event operations, or we're driving around for field day making hundreds of contacts, my passenger can sit there with a laptop plugged into the radio and log automatically while I drive. So try to get it so that the base part of your radio is, the rear is easily accessible so you can do that. It's actually going to come in very, very handy when you kind of get serious about this stuff. This station was good enough to get about 50 countries in the log. I made my first contacts to New Zealand, Australia, all over Europe. And I think we even got one with Japan with a ham stick. Yep. So you can have quite a lot of fun with a station at this level, and it's not really very hard to put it together. So now you got the mobile HF bug. Maybe you're in an HOA and this is the only HF you're going to get. Now let's get a little more serious. A screwdriver antenna is sort of the ultimate solution. Why? First of all, it'll work well on multiple bands. You can get a screwdriver antenna to be very efficient and workable, even a small one, on 40 meters. And if you get a larger one, you can do 80 and even 160 meters fairly effectively from a mobile. Now, I chose a large screwdriver antenna mounted in the bed of my truck. This one is from, I forget exactly the name of the folks, but who is it? Scorpion, right. A lot of people use Tar Heels. The advantage of this antenna over a Tar Heel is that it's larger, so it can handle the mechanical load of something like this and not fail. I'm not sure I would put this on a Tar Heel. Okay, whip is fine on a Tar Heel. And because the coil is bigger, it's much more efficient, a lot less coil loss. You can see I got a fold-over mount. There's a guy by the name of Breedlove Mounts that makes all manner of mounts for this type of application. And what I can do with my screwdriver in my truck is when I'm not using it, I want to wash it, I just take the whip off, fold it over, pull the roll cover up, and go through the car wash or in the garage or whatever. I did use a controller, and I want to share something with you. I'll come back to this, but I made my first 75-meter phone contact to Japan ever from the mobile and that antenna. That's 75 meters, okay? So we'll talk a little bit more about DXing as we go through this. All right, now let's suppose you get this far and you're getting really serious. The final stage is to up the power to overcome the efficiency issues of the antenna. There is only one mobile HF amplifier commercially made at this point. It comes from MFJ. And while they build it as a 500 watt amplifier, I've never actually seen it produce 500 watts on any band. You'll reliably get at least 250 to 300 watts. As you go lower in frequency, you'll get maybe 400 on 40 and 80 and 160. But that still is a pretty significant boost up over a 100 watt radio. And the game, I wouldn't do that with a ham stick. This thing, I literally started an 80-meter ham stick on fire with my amplifier, because it's just not built for that kind of power. But if you have a screwdriver antenna that's built for power, this could take you the rest of the way, and particularly if you want to be a crazy person and do something like 160 meters, which I have done. I actually was in a 160-meter contest, sideband contester at one point. And I swear I'll never do it again because I probably busted more calls, because when you're in a contest with a big stations, one AB10C mobile does not compute. Okay, and I'm pretty sure, you know, I got AB10C Mike, and I got AB10C Maritime, and I got everything but AB10C mobile, because the contesters just couldn't compute that you would do that. And to do that, I have to actually add an additional coil on my screwdriver antenna. That's what this is. It adds enough additional loading that with the rod and the cap hat there, I'm resonant on 160 meters. I can operate through the Caribbean, occasional contact in Europe, but it's marginal, about half the US mobile on 160 with this band. Yeah, Phil. Well, all of these antennas are going to be very narrow in bandwidth. If you move more than a few kilohertz away from your operating, you're going to have to tweak the screwdriver antenna to get back in resonance. So the game you're playing here, and by the way, this does help a lot. This has a much higher bandwidth capability than just a whip alone would be. It basically does broadband the antenna, mostly because of the diameter of the rod involved here. But this is the advantage of a screwdriver antenna. Every time you move a little bit, you look at your SWR and you'll say, well, I'm a little higher, a little low, and you kind of just stop transmitting. You just adjust the length. You can hear it. The noise levels goes up and down as you hit resonance. And then you transmit, and maybe you're at 1.7, you touch it up a little bit, get it below 1.5, and you go back at it. Some other things that become important, your matching will need an additional amount of parallel inductance to cancel what will be a capacitively tuned short antenna. And you'll have these kinds of load coils across your feed points. Now for 160, you actually need a separate one. I have a little box rigged up with two of these coils that I can switch from the cab with a switch to say, okay, I want the 160 version of this versus the one that's for 75 and 40 meters. But if you want to build out an all band station to go from 160 to 10, you can definitely do it in a mobile setup. And the last thing that's important when you run power at any time, proper fusing and battery cabling is important. So I ended up having to, a 500 watt amplifier will draw over 100 amps when you're transmitting. And you could get, if your vehicle has a towing package on it, it probably has a 120 or 140 amp alternator, but you need more battery capacity. So when you get in the amplifier stage, you'll usually install a second battery, which is what I did. You can see there's my second battery in the trunk. And the cabling is very buildable, but you need to get the proper materials, terminals, crimps, or take it to like a stereo place that does, these boom box car things where the car like almost walks across. If you get somebody that installs those audio systems, they can do this for you. These are 250 amp fuses that I use to fuse my amplifier. Okay, all of this stuff, you can see the picture on the lower right, is all situated under the fold-up rear seat of my truck. And there's the amplifier. You can see the fuses in the upper left. I also have a rig runner block for some of my accessories that all fuse from there. And then the antenna controller. And lastly, interfaces for a watt meter. I actually use a Elecraft W2 that's mounted right on my console, next to my console, so I can see what my SWRs are when I'm transmitting. For a 100 watt radio, you don't need that. If you're going to run an amplifier, you probably want a real meter so you can see, what's going on. So, how about if you don't have a Ford F-150? You're saying, well, you got this big vehicle, Fred, and I don't have that. Is this really going to work for me? So this is a friend of mine that used the Scorpion antenna in his wife's Honda Accord, or Civic, I think it was actually. And the car did have a trailer hitch on it, so he went to a local trailer place and had him fab up an arm to kind of take off the mount of the trailer hitch and create him a little pedestal about at trunk level on the side of the car to mount the screwdriver antenna. This car, like many do, had a fold-down rear seat, so he made a thing with a piece of plywood and some straps that fastened the plywood to the rear seat, and he mounted all of his electronics, transmitter and watt meter and tuners and all that right on there. The first week he had it, he worked the Philippines on 20 meters with his car at 100 watts. Very, very capable, well done mobile HF station. I think he used a 7100, which is in current production for his radio here. 100 watts, nothing special. So you can see he does have a short rod, just like this one with a cap hat. He used the Scorpion antenna, which is strong enough, and he built a good solid mounting system for it. So if you only have a car, you don't have a big vehicle, don't think you can't build a very, very competent mobile HF station. You definitely can. All right, so what can you expect to work? Well, as I said, I'm going to pass this around. I made my very first contact with Japan on 75 meters, even before I did it with my home station, from my mobile. And it was an interesting story. I remember it well. It was the day before Christmas, and I'm driving down my driveway, and I routinely worked Europe on 75. That's not hard to do with a setup like this at all. And I had the radio on, and I hear a lot of chatter in the DX window on 75. So I start listening, and I hear JA4. So I'm thinking, geez, if I can hear this guy, I wonder if I can work him. So I immediately forgot about the mailbox, dashed to the highest spot on the New Hampshire-Massachusetts border near my home, parked, got the antenna adjusted, and started calling. Now, at that point, there was a decent pileup going, maybe with 10 or 15 stations. On the third call, the JA said, "Who's the mobile?" And everybody in the pileup completely shut up because they heard me calling. They knew I was a one. And, you know, work in Japan on 75 is not necessarily an easy thing to do from here in New England. So we went back and forth 3 or 4 times. You can see the signal reports on the card there. And at the end of the day, when it was all done, it was quiet for a second. Somebody came on and said, "Man, that was one for the books." And it really was. I had never worked Japan on 75 sideband before. I was a relatively new ham when I did that. And it was a pretty amazing contact. Some other things, sitting in my driveway earlier that week, I worked Ulan Island on 40 meters, which is just near South Korea from my mobile, just sitting in the driveway playing with the radio. And I routinely, when I'm driving around on the eastern seaboard here, work people in places like South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, all over Europe. Western Europe is slam dunk from even like a 20-meter ham stick and 100 watts if it's well installed. So you can work a ton of stuff. DXCC's mobile are very doable with some patience. With a 500-watt setup and a screwdriver antenna, it's like shooting fish in barrel. It won't take you very long at all to get DXC. You probably do it in 2 or 3 months. And you know, there's nothing better to pass the time on a trip, to have a nice conversation with a ham in Europe or someplace else in the world. It really is a wonderful thing when you're driving around. A couple things about operating. You have an advantage with a mobile station that you don't have with your home station, and that is you could go to a place where it's quiet and propagation is better than your home station. That trick I played with 75 to go to the top of a hill, not sure I could have done that from my driveway. Definitely would have been a much weaker contact. Also, once you get away from the bigger cities, things quiet down a lot. And that can be a huge advantage when you're trying to work weak stuff. So, you know, one of the big things that's positive about a mobile HF station, if it's a well-built one, is you have the ability to go in the best possible place to locate your antenna. Also, wet places make a big difference. There's a swamp near my house, and when I want to work something that's really difficult, I like to go park alongside of the swamp because the ground is wet and those ground losses are lower. Big advantage on 40, 80, and 160 to do that. Almost better than being high. So don't forget about that. In the pileup, use stroke mobile. I know this from my experience as a 13 colonies operator. That tends to stand out in the pileup. So if you're operating mobile, AB10C stroke mobile or AB10C mobile, anything that identifies you're a mobile, many operators will pick you out of a pileup. When I worked Navassa Island, it took me exactly 1 try to work them on 20 meters in the middle of a big pileup. Why? Because the operator heard the mobile. Okay. When you really are doing an important contact and you're going to call hard, like that one I made in Japan, get to a safe spot, park, and focus on what you're doing. You don't want the fact that you're trying to put maybe an all-time new one in the log and trying to do that while you're driving in traffic. Be safe. Think safety first here. That's really important. Try calling CQ. I'll tell you a little story about park activation. You will be surprised how many people will hear you and answer you. Also, special operating activities. You can be something rare. Take advantage of that. Parks, working in contests, things like that are all good opportunities for mobile operation. So some things that we've done, a few years back, we had national parks on the air, and we drove all over creation activating parks. Anita actually and I planned a vacation all the way up through New England. We went through Maine and New Hampshire and other places and activated a whole bunch of parks. And one of the things that happened here, does anybody know where Katahdin Woods and Waters is? It's a recently declared national park. And it turned out that it was made a national park during National Parks on the Air, and we were the very first people to ever activate it. Okay? And I remember this well. We got into this place where the ranger's cabin was, and there was a little billboard with a paper printed sign that said, Katahdin Woods and Waters National Park. We pulled up next to the cabin where we were safe and then hooked the computer up so we could log, and we started calling. About 5 minutes in, the pileup was so big we couldn't hear anything anymore. I went split in the mobile, and in 4 hours we sat there and made 450 contacts as a mobile station. Huge pileup, and we could have probably, if it wasn't getting dark and we were afraid we weren't going to be able to find our way out of the place, we probably could have sat there and made more. On that trip, we made a total of 2,165 contacts mobile. So if you build a good mobile station and you kind of like going to parks and rare places, you can actually have quite a lot of interesting operating activity by doing this. We have easily run 120 queues per hour sustained, with Anita sitting over there and capturing the call signs and logging, and me operating as fast as I can. These are not high rates from a contest perspective, but they're respectable. And I mentioned the Katahdin Woods and Waters. When we do this, we'll typically use a computer logger. If we're in full out contest mode, usually N1MM. If we're just kind of screwing around, we'll use our DX Lab, our regular casual logger. Okay, another thing, and this one gets to Anita's credit, people collect counties. There is a county hunters aspect to amateur radio that wants to work every single county in the United States. And as a mobile HF operator, you are extremely popular, especially if you want to activate rare places. So a few years ago, Anita worked out, we decided to drive to Dayton from up here, and she found the 100 rarest counties she could that people needed, and we planned to activate all of them. Okay, and you can see the route. We took one route out, one route back. Now, some of these places, we're driving up a dirt road to the places where there's no tracks anymore, and we're pulling trees out of the way to get into some screwball county that probably doesn't have hardly any access. So you're going to be doing some of that. But you can do some interesting things. There was one spot in Pennsylvania, and this is how this works. If you're in a vehicle and you have the front wheels in one place and the back wheels in another place, you can activate both places at once. So we found a spot along the road where there were 4 counties, and we had one wheel in each one. And we sat there, and we finally just had to give up. I mean, we were just running people for several hours, and it just seemed like they kept coming. I don't know how that happened. They must have been spotted on every county hunter's net in the eastern half of the United States or something. But you can do things like that. The New England QSO Party works on counties. Wonderful opportunity to go mobile HF. And in fact, we've done that a few times. I think I have a slide on it here. So another cool activity, you're going to want to have a cell phone or some kind of GPS-based thing so you know that you are where you actually think you are, so you're doing it right. But another really fun activity you can do from the moment. You can see Anita over there with a laptop hooked up. She's doing the login. You got our 2 iPhones up there that have grid square and county information on them. And we're in full out activation mode here. All right, contests. We did CQ Worldwide DX sideband a bunch of times. I made 85 DX contacts, got it, in one contest there. So think about this. Imagine building a mobile station and getting 85% to a DXCC in one weekend. Easy way to do it. I don't recommend 160 contests, though. I'm not going to do that again. New England QSO Party, this is the route we did on that one. We activated 11 counties, and we literally had people offering us steak dinners as we go drive into some county and activate it for them so they could get the last one. Nah. And again, we'll actually go all out. You can see me. Now, typically here it'll be a team. One person will drive. One person will sit in the passenger seat and log and operate. And a third person will navigate and decide where to go next. And then we take turns in the roles. And we kind of make a whole weekend out of it. So you can see over here, I'm operating. I've got a headset on. I've got the computer, and I'm in full out contest mode in the mobile. and this kind of stuff. There you can see we're sitting on a county border and activating 2 counties at once. So this stuff is a lot of fun. All right, so I don't know if there's going to be a way to post these presentations or not. Certainly, I'll make this available. We do write a website called stationproject.blog, which has all kinds of articles on how to do this kind of stuff. But the go-to place to find out is K0BG. Do I have him in here? Yeah. This guy, Alan Applegate, has a website that is absolutely the book on how to do all things mobile HF. And it's very topical. It'll tell you if you're interested in bonding grounding, what radios to get, antennas, cap, anything you can imagine. He'll have a section. So definitely, if you're looking to learn more how to do this, that's the #1 place to go. So with that, I'm going to stop and see, are there any questions or any comments about any of this stuff? I'm sorry? Yeah. Okay, a couple of things, great point. So Alan Applegate's website, which is where the book on mobile HF is kilo0brabogolf.com, K0BG. And our website, which has lots of articles on mobile HF and station building in general, is stationproject, one word, .blog. Okay? Any other questions? Phil, go ahead. You know, I don't have a ton of experience with this. I don't think there's anything about a hybrid vehicle per se that prevents one from doing this with a 100-watt radio. You probably will run into issues with not having magnetic materials in many newer vehicles. So if you're going to do this, you're going to have to think about something that's permanently attached to the vehicle, maybe the bodywork. People make mounts that do that. If your vehicle has a trailer hitch, that can be a great way to do this, and you can in fact remove your antenna. What I would say is grounding, bonding, and if you have a screwdriver antenna, choking, are going to be the keys to success in those situations. Because you're going to have 2 problems. One is you're going to want to try to make sure that your exhaust pipe, your engine block, those 2 big hitters are properly bypassed. And then the other thing that you're going to want to deal with is if you have a screwdriver antenna and that above potential RF for the controllers, you're going to want to do your choking properly to keep the RF out of the cabin. But I don't see any reason why this wouldn't work well on a hybrid. In some ways, it might work better because when the hybrid is not using the engine, a lot of that pulse noise that is our enemy in mobile HF actually probably doesn't exist. So it's potentially a quieter platform if it has enough metal and if it's properly bonded and grounded. Yeah. Yeah, you got to, that's the #1 thing you got to do to make this work really well. But if you do that, you'll find that you'll probably have a good chance of having a station that's quieter than what you have at home. But it does take some work to do that. I spent a couple days underneath my truck installing straps and all that kind of stuff. Any other questions? Yeah. The one thing I would say is, does it matter? I will say that here's a scenario like that. When we go teach license classes in person, we teach them at a medical center. The way that works is I'll set a whole 100-watt station with a 500-watt amplifier up inside the break room in the hospital where we do this, and I'll run 250 feet of coax out to the screwdriver antenna on my truck and use it for the antenna. That's probably, I probably crossed over into the portable domain there, wouldn't you say, right? I've done demonstrations at boys and girls clubs the same way, where I'll park the thing on the street in town, like in Nashua, and I'll set up a whole radio station with a 7300 and all the fixings, computer and all that in, you know, the girls club or boys club place, and run a coax out to the street. So if you're into those kinds of things, and you particularly invest in a good screwdriver antenna and quiet your vehicle down, you actually have a really nice mobile antenna platform that you can use in tons and tons of places. So what I would say is, you know, there's a blurry line there. But the thing you want to also understand is if you like to operate that way, once you do this, it enables all kinds of operating modes for you that you might not have thought of before. So I don't know if that's a good answer to your question or not, but that's how I think about it. Anybody else? Yeah. Yeah, you need more power. It certainly would be a wonderful radio. You'd also have to worry, it's a pretty heavy radio. So you'd have to think about how to safely mount that. It's not impossible. There are always ways to do that. But I can't stress enough, you need the controls right as part of the instrument cluster. Do not get it so that you have to take your... My rule is, only way it's safe to operate mobile is you can do it with your eyes on the road and at least one hand on the wheel. If your setup doesn't allow for that, even for a split second, it's not safe. It's not safe. And there are lots of good mounting systems out there, if you start looking around, that will allow you to do that. Any other questions? You know, feel free, we're going to have a little bit of time. We're going to do an ARL forum in here in a bit. But if you want to come up and look at the trinkets and the toys and play with them, you're more than welcome to do that. Oh, one last thing I didn't do. What about CW operators? Get yourself one of these. This is a mobile key, and you'll notice it's got these interesting little straps. What that's for, I have a Velcro strap that I can put this right around my leg, okay? And I can drive down the road and I can be banging out CW while I'm driving, okay? So again, nothing that you can do in your home station, digital, contests, DXing, all of that with a properly built mobile HF station. For those of you who have HOA restrictions and you can't really get the kinds of antennas you want, give this some serious consideration. You would, in some ways, I have more fun with my mobile. I have a pretty nice home station. It's a big station. But I actually have more fun on my mobile station just because of the novelty of doing, you know, DX contacts and that kind of stuff in a configuration that's not so easy.